Using post-process materials, we can apply a wide variety of effects to our renders. These effects can be scene-wide or render on selective assets within a level. In this module, we'll create a mask that will allow us to determine which assets in our level have an effect applied to them. Let's mask our characters to only render the base color on them, but render the environment with PBR lighting. In order to do this, let's make a copy of our post-process master material base color. I can do that by either Control-C and Control-V within the content browser, or I can right-click and I can say duplicate. So let's duplicate it, and let's add a suffix ch for character. Let's turn off our current blendables. Let's set the outline to 0, and let's set the post-process base color on the entire scene to 0 as well. And we're going to get our original scene back by turning off our blendables. So now let's open up our newly created material. In order to mask the base color onto the characters, we're going to need to create a new scene texture node. So let's copy and paste the current one we have. And let's set the scene texture ID to custom depth. At a high level, what the custom depth node is going to allow us to do is to search for objects in the scene that have the render with custom depth toggle turned on, and it's going to only render those assets. So let's select the boy and let's select the mannequin. And over in the details panel, let's search for custom depth. And we can see under rendering, it's the first option, render custom depth pass. So if we check this, now we're going to be able to isolate these objects with this node and render them selectively. We can see that we've lost our animation, but if we just toggle one frame back and then back to where we were, the animation will come back. In my material, if I take this node and copy and paste it again, and I go grab my scene depth and I subtract my custom depth from my scene depth, and then I plug this in and I hit save. We're also going to need a clamp in order to see the result. And I save my material. And I go back to my post-process volume, and I add a new blendable, and I set this material. I can see right away I have a mask of the characters in the environment. Now currently, the environment is white and the characters are black. We're going to want to invert that. We can do that with a 1-. So if we right-click, and we type 1, we can see under math, we have 1-. And 1- is basically an inversion. So now if I plug this in and I save, my characters are white and my environment is black. I can see that my custom depth is isolating the two objects that have custom depth turned on in the details panel. So in order to get our base color to render, we're going to need to lerp our mask on top of our base color. We're also going to need another scene texture that's going to take post-process input 0 and render it where the environment is. So now if I plug this in and I hit save, I can see I get the base color on the characters, but not on the environment. I also notice that the environment is really black and dark, and the reason for that is because we had an exposure compensation in the original post-process volume set to 3. So if I set this post-process volume materials that we've created to 3, the environment begins to look correct, but the characters are looking quite blown out. So a way to get around this is we're going to set this back to 0. We're going to go back into our material, and I'm going to create a multiply node. And I'm going to multiply my post-process input 0 by 6. And now if I plug this into the lerp, I can see I have an adequate amount of light on the scene. Let's jump into the sequencer and take a look at what's happening here. We have our characters rendering with base color and our environment rendering with PBR. We also have a depth of field that's happening through our camera that's rendering incorrectly on the characters. Now, the reason for this, if we go back into our material, is because in our post-process material, we've set the blendable location to before tone mapping. If we set the blendable location to before translucency, and then we hit save, we can see that the mannequin properly gets laid underneath the depth of field effect. The reason is because depth of field requires translucency to render. So setting the blendable location there can correct that problem. if depth of field is what you desire on your render. We now have a mask that determines which assets in the level will render. This mask can be used with any of the textures we use with a post-processed material. A few additional controls are needed in order for outlines to render correctly on isolated assets. In the following course module, we'll adjust our mask to work with outlines.